And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thanks so much for joining us once again. And it's great to have our favorite Canadian with us. That is Ezra Levant. Ezra, thanks so much for giving us your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's great to catch up with you.
Always good to catch up. So much to discuss, and rebel news are everywhere. It seems as though, Ezra, your team are just always expanding. The areas you cover, the places you go. Not even mentioning Avi all the way down under, but you seem to have always a growing team, new people that are covering what is happening and holding certainly the Canadian government and wider to account.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, we do love to recruit citizen journalists, so we're always keeping our eyes peeled. And by citizen journalists, I mean people who typically don't go to journalism school and don't come from the mainstream media. I use the word regime media now because so many mainstream journalists really are just spokesmen for the political media industrial complex. There are, of course, some exceptional examples to the contrary. I have to tell you, I really admire a lot of the journalism done by GB News. I think they're doing great stuff, especially on migrants. What they've been doing the last week in Calais, I think, is excellent. But on the whole, if you are an establishment news source, I really don't care what they say because I feel like I'm not getting the whole story. So at Rebel News, our motto is telling the other side of the story. And I love finding young citizen journalists and throwing them into the deep end.
Download the Getter app right now. It's totally free. It's where I put up exclusively all of my content 24 hours a day. You want to know what Steve Bannon's thinking? Go to Getter.
So don't wait. Download the Getter app now.
Sign up for free and be part of the movement.
Tell us about the situation in Canada regarding immigration, because in the UK, we have those, as you mentioned, and it was just on GB News about those immigrant camps in France, in Calais, to try and get people over that small stretch of water, the English Channel, one of, if not the busiest stretches of water in the world. We have a huge issue in that, and also many other ways. Where does the pressure come in Canada in terms of the illegal immigration?
Yeah, great question. So many folks come to the UK in dinghies. They just get in a boat and cross over. And by the way, once they're in the UK, they cross over from Northern Ireland into Ireland itself. So it really is a pipeline of refugee fraud. These are not genuine refugees. They're not coming in a normal rules-based system. Everyone knows they're fake. Same thing in the United States, where millions of people just walked across the southern border under Joe Biden. In Canada, it's different. We do have some fraudulent illegals walking right across the US-Canada border. And you might say, why would anyone cross from America into Canada? That doesn't make sense. Well, think about what's going on there. Donald Trump is deporting foreigners who don't have a legal basis to be there. So if you are a criminal or someone who's been ordered deported in America, you have three choices. You can hide, you can, I guess, comply, or you can scoot across into Canada. And for example, there's an enormous number of Haitians, people from Haiti, in the United States. They were given a special dispensation because there was an earthquake and then other trauma in Haiti. Well, Trump is saying that's over now, go home. If you are Haiti is one of the worst places in the world. I mean, God bless their people. I wish them nothing but the best, but that is a failed state. It is run by rival gangs. It is terrible. Peter, if you were a Haitian person who has spent the last 10 years in the United States, wouldn't you want to do anything besides going home? Well, they're all coming across the border and going to a French-speaking city in Canada called Montreal. So that's an example of how people who were ordered deported from America are crossing our undefended border to get here. But other than that, most of the migrants to Canada are legal. And that's because Justin Trudeau and our new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, have opened the floodgates. I just saw a statistic this morning. There are more than 3 million temporary residents in Canada who do not have citizenship. These are fake students who sign up to sort of diploma mills, like fake colleges, and they have the right to work. So they say they're students. They pay 10 grand for tuition, which is basically a bribe. We have official temporary foreign workers, which are basically foreigners taking entry-level jobs away from youth. Like, I remember my very first job when I was 14. I worked in a burger stand for minimum wage, exactly $3.80 or whatever it was. That job now would not go to a young Canadian looking for the first rung on the ladder. That job would go to someone typically from India. We have an enormous influx of people from India and Bangladesh. And so you have millions of foreigners in Canada. And the trouble is, in the UK, theoretically, you could deport them because they came illegally. In America, they're deporting hundreds of thousands. But in Canada, other than some of those illegal border crossings like the Haitians I just mentioned, everyone else is here actually with the approval of the government. It's shocking. We have opened the floodgates, and I think we have to start using the word remigration. This country is like, you think Canada is a big place. Look at it on the map. It's the second largest landmass in the world. But most of that is uninhabitable. It's tundra, it's ice. I don't know if you know the stat, Peter, 90% of Canadians live within an hour's drive of the US border. Canada looks huge, but it's actually that thin band right across from the US. And we have dumped in 3 million foreigners in a country of 40 million people. So nearly 10% of Canadians, in fact, I just saw that 18% of the workforce is foreign. What are we doing? Especially when unemployment is high. Youth unemployment is double digits. Why are we doing this? And just like in the UK, migrants drive down wages and they drive up rents. And I get it. If I was born in Calcutta, I would do anything to get to London or Toronto. If I was born in Haiti, I would do anything to get to Montreal. But Canada is for Canadians, just like the UK should be for Brits and Ireland should be for the Irish. One last thing, and I know I'm going on. This is a 10-minute answer to your 30-second question. I've spent a little bit of time in Ireland recently. I've never been there until last year. It's a very interesting place. I have an affection for the Irish. And the thing about Ireland, my favorite part about Ireland, is how Irish it is. It's my favorite part of Italy, how Italian it is. My favorite part of France is how French it is. But it's not diversity when all of these countries bring in millions and millions of migrants from Syria, and Somalia, and Afghanistan. Then Irish isn't Irish anymore. Ireland isn't Irish anymore. I want true diversity. I want there to be an Irish Ireland, an Italian Italy, a Polish Poland, a Russian Russia. I want every country to be themselves. And what's so crazy about Ireland is it's such a tiny place. There's only 5 million Irish. By the way, 1 million of those are foreign. And why is that little island with that little population, why has it hurtled so quickly towards, I don't want to use the phrase replacement immigration, but it's hard to resist that conclusion when you see the extreme steps. Give me 30 more seconds on this. I know I'm at 20 minutes long answer now. I think I might have told you I went to this little village called Dundrum in Ireland, population 200. Stop me if I've told you this before. It's like a picture postcard. It's the prettiest place in the world. I immediately became nostalgic for Dundrum when I was in Dundrum. Like, it's just such an ineffable place. I thought, oh my God, who would ever want to leave here? I feel like I'm in a storybook. Okay, so population 200. In one fell swoop, the Irish government, without consultation or permission, just did a deal with the local golf and country club, took it off the market as a hotel and golf course, and put 240 migrant men in there, immediately rendering the Irish population of Dundrum a minority. They were not consulted. Dundrum is a high trust society. Everyone knows everyone. And In fact, when I was there with my cameraman, we stopped at the side of the road to film what we call B-roll, just background footage. And someone pulls over and says, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing?" In a nice enough way, but this is neighbors checking on neighbors. Who's the out-of-towner? And we said, "Oh, we're here to cover this, and we're with friends with Marianne." He said, "Okay, no problem." But that's small town Ireland. That's a high trust society. And imagine putting in 240 military-aged migrant men, let me say it, sex starved. They have different views about how to treat women, especially uncovered women who don't have a male guardian, because that's how it is in a low trust society. If a woman went out by herself in a low trust society, if she would be a victim. If a woman went out uncovered, well, only a prostitute would do that. So you have people who have these extreme notions of how to treat women being dumped in a town where women would walk through a forest with a dog, you know, and that used to be normal, and people would leave. And so that's why I have such an interest in Ireland, because it's such a small country that could be immediately overwhelmed. And I see that happening in Epping, uh, in the outskirts of London. People are finally standing up to these migrant hotels. So I'm riveted by the migration stories around the world. I've seen mass migration in Malmo, Sweden, in Marseille, France, in Cologne, Germany, in Dublin and around Ireland, in London. I'm trying to study mass immigration to see its characteristics and to see what works and what doesn't, and to try and understand what motivates native people to push back. I use the word native. Why don't I use the word indigenous? Because they're not the Irish indigenous to Ireland, or not the Brits and the English indigenous there. We tend to think of the word indigenous to deal with an exotic tribe in Africa or South America, but are not the Celts, are not the Anglos, are they not indigenous in their places, being there for centuries or even thousands of years? And why is it that that's the only indigenous group that can't have a homeland? And I find these things fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time.
Well, the next time you come over to Ireland, we'll go to Dundrum in the north of Ireland, which has a lovely old castle and actually has some history, and not Dundrum on the outskirts of Dublin, which isn't as scenic. But look, Ezra, I live in London, or Londonistan, as Melanie Phillips would coin the term. And I'm wondering the impact of in cities. And you're right. Well, no, I don't have to tell you, you're right, but most Canadians live on near the US border, and not in the far north of Canada. And Toronto has always been billed as a multicultural city, a melting pot, just like where I am in London. Montreal kind of has held that French element, that French history, so maybe something different. But how is immigration affecting the cities? And I guess just like Ireland, the further away you move from Dublin, the more Irish it becomes. I guess the same for Canada. The further away you move from the metropolitan areas, the more Canadian it comes.
Just really quickly, the Dundrum I'm referring to is in County Tipperary. I know there's a few different Dundrums around the island, but it was in Tipperary, which is a lovely place. Back to your question. I recently saw a statistic that New York City, which looks poised to elect Zoran Mamdani as their new mayor. As you can tell by the name, he's actually a Muslim migrant born in Uganda. He's a radical communist. And he beat really an old-time politician, Andrew Cuomo, whose father was governor before him, and now he's running for. So it's really a demographic story. New York City used to be about the three I's of foreign politics: Israel, Ireland, and Italy. Those were the three big demographics, as well as Black Americans too, of course. But it was said, I forget who said it, maybe it was Ed Koch, he said, or Fiorello LaGuardia, I don't know, that you need to know your foreign affairs for Italy, Israel, and Ireland if you want to be the mayor of New York. It was sort of fun, but that's not the New York City of 2025, is it? And I saw a statistic that New York City is 37% foreign born, I think. I'm just going from memory, 37%. It sounds like a lot. That's not a lot. Toronto is about 50%. There's an outskirts of Toronto called Brampton, 59%. 59% of Brampton, Ontario is foreign born. And without looking it up, I wouldn't know the stats for London. But Canada is worse. Everyone's remarking on the shocking statistic of New York City, 37%. If only. And in addition to the mass in-migration of foreigners, Brampton has seen a white flight of 100,000. So, I mean, on the one hand, I would not blame anyone who said, I want to get to the promised land of Canada or the promised land of London. I mean, I was once I mentioned I was in Malmo, Sweden, which is now 50% Islamic. I was in the neighborhood of Rosengard, which was once completely Swedish. The whole day I saw one Swedish woman, and I ran up to her and I said, who are you? What are you doing here? And she was sort of the last Swede in Rosengard. It was heartbreaking to talk to her. And so I think countries around the world have to decide, are you just an address? Are you just a hotel? Are you just an airport code? Or are you something more? Is there a connection between the people and the land? And, Professor David Starkey, the late Roger Scruton, these are people who would talk about the importance of connecting to the land and knowing that your parents and your grandparents and your grandparents and going back 1,000 years in your line interacted with the same river and the same city and by the way, high trust societies take centuries to build, but unfortunately only a generation to destroy. This is one of my observations because I'm riveted by what's going on in Ireland, because I see in Dublin protests of 40,000 or more people with no political party leading them, with no media cheering for them. These are as grassroots and authentic as possible. And I think, why is that happening in Dublin, but not in London and not in Toronto? And I think part of it goes to the ethnic cohesion of the Irish people, who are a language, a history, a culture, an ethnicity. There is an Irishness. You could move to Ireland and become a citizen, but Irishness it's an ethnicity. And God bless it. I vive la différence. Like I say, I love French France. I don't want it to be McDonaldized, through mass immigration. And so do you have that sense of community and cohesion in a massive megalopolis like London? Or are we just atomized with no sense of connection to our neighbors, and really everything we do is through our cell phone and an app, and we just live through our phones? And there was recently an alleged rape in Ballymena in Northern Ireland, on the UK side. And the community came out. It was mums and dads and because everyone knew someone who knew the girl or knew the family, and there was a cohesion, and there was an identity that was pricked. These were outside migrants foisted on the community who had raped a young girl in the community, and everyone knew her. Do you have that same sense of community in London? Of course you don't. You don't know who your neighbors are. And so because we're so atomized in our big cities, Toronto, London, frankly, the reason it happened in Dublin is because it's happened so quickly. Everything in Dublin has happened in the last 20 or even the last 10 or extremely in the last 5 years. You know the old saying, I think it's really gross, but it's very visceral. You throw a frog into boiling water, it jumps right out because it's so hot. You put a frog in water and slowly raise the temperature, it boils alive. Don't ever do that, by the way. I think that's such a gross thing, but I think of that. Dublin was shocked with how Ireland has been shocked by how extreme, like that story of Dundrum in Tipperary. That's so shocking. In one fell swoop, like it wasn't over 10 years, it was over 10 hours that town became minority Irish. So you're going to have the town rise up. But if it happens over the course of 20 or 30 years and you're in a big city and oh, well, that's what a big city is. you're not going to resist. And I don't know, London and New York have always been metropolises, and they've always been people coming and going. I mean, I'm not here to say that London isn't an international city. I mean, it was the seat of a global empire, but there was a Britishness to it. There was an identity to it. I don't know. There's some weird self-hatred, I think, amongst Britain's leaders these days, giving away Gibraltar, giving away the Chagos Islands, giving back priceless artifacts from the British Museum to countries that will lose them or have them stolen. This self-abnegation, this self-hatred that is taught in every institution in the UK, turning some clerical error into an excuse to bring 100,000 Afghans over, claiming they're all interpreters, when only 1,000 interpreters ever served. Well, guess what? You got 100,000 Afghans coming, the rapists in the world.
No,
Anyhow, another half-hour answer to your question. Apologies.
No, exactly. And you mentioned about the demonstrations, the frustration in Ireland, and I've always been curious and wondering why Ireland, who is a country that has changed beyond all recognition from when I grew up in the Republic in the 80s, and one of the biggest social experiments to see how you can invert a society and go from the most Christian-based country in Europe to now one of the most liberal and self-hating countries. But those, I think the Irish government don't yet know exactly what to do with that rise because they didn't expect it. Obviously, in Canada, we saw the Freedom Convoys, the Canadian truckers with Tamara Leach and others, and they were able to shut that down. How does that work in terms of pushing back against the awful government which you're now stuck with? You go from the frying pan into the fire, I think, from Trudeau to Carney. But how do you see the ability of citizens to mobilize and come together whenever they were so punished, whenever it happened previously?
Well, you're right. It was an amazing thing, the trucker convoy. And it was amazing for a number of reasons. First of all, just like the Irish protests, where no political party supported them, no regime media supported them, no source of money supported them. They tried to crowdfund a budget. It was seized twice. The first time GoFundMe wouldn't pass it on. The second time the government seized it. So it was so authentic. It was so grassroots. And citizen journalists, by the way, were an important part of that because the regime media had their script. Oh, these are just January 6th insurrectionists all over again. Well, you can't tell that story and make it stick if there's ordinary citizens live streaming the thing all day. We had 2 reporters on the scene 23 days straight. They didn't take a day off. They knew they were in the middle of history. We had 400 million views and impressions in the month of February 2022. I believe that Rebel News and other independent journalists were the reason Trudeau didn't get away with that. And he panicked and he declared martial law. And actually, that's when things started to fall apart for Trudeau. Now we have Mark Carney, as you mentioned, who started off as a Canadian, but then he became a British citizen and an Irish citizen. So we're one of only 3, we're in his top 3 favorite countries, I guess. And then he went from being our Bank of Canada governor to the English Bank of Canada governor. Then he went to the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. So the guy's always looking around. He's like those people at a party who are always, they're talking to you, but they're looking around for someone better to talk to. And so he decided to come to Canada and be our prime minister, even though he hasn't lived here in a decade, hasn't paid taxes here in a decade. And he was the chairman of a mini BlackRock called Brookfield. It's not very mini. It has $1 trillion in assets under management. So this guy who specialized in hiding assets in offshore trusts. I went to the Isle of Man. I went to Bermuda trying to track down where he was stashing things. Anyway, so he becomes prime minister and he refuses to sell his stocks. So he owns approximately 600 shares in 600 companies. We don't know his total net worth, it wouldn't surprise me if he's a billionaire, or certainly hundreds of millions. And he owns stocks in every possible industry: high tech, oil and gas, wind power, pharmaceuticals. Like when you own 600 different companies' shares, you are a global behemoth, and he won't sell them. And so he's got this bizarre ethics screen where whenever an issue comes up that touches on one of his holdings, he's supposed to leave the room. How are you going to run a country when you have 600 conflicts of interest? What I don't understand is why he just doesn't sell them unless he's still looking around for another better deal. It's so weird. I call Carney Trudeau 2.0, but he's smarter and harder working and better connected. Trudeau was always a bit of a fool. At most, he was a mascot. He had a lot of party tricks, like he would show people his fancy socks, and he would make little jokes. Carney's actually quite boring and stiff by contrast, but Carney is dead serious. And by the way, it also happens to be that I don't know, Mark Carney, his wife's family is in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. Mark Carney and his wife were partying in the UK with Ghislaine Maxwell. We never got an explanation for that. How well do they know each other? And Prince Andrew, who settled a lawsuit by one of Epstein's victims, paid her hundreds of thousands of dollars to shut up. He threw a party at Buckingham Palace for Mark Carney and paid the bill. So, I mean, maybe that all has a perfectly innocent explanation. It probably does. But what are you doing in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book? His wife's family. What are you doing? I think, in fact, she hid at Carney's wife's friend's family house for like maybe British fancy pants high society is that small. I don't know, but it reminded me a little bit of that Tom Cruise movie, Eyes Wide Shut. And I just want to know what his connection was. Like, just say it.
Wow. Is there no chance of you getting Stephen Harper out of retirement? I mean, the Conservative Party seems to have failed to have elect a popular leader. And in the last election, Pierre managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. No chance of him coming out and actually being a Conservative leader, which is quite rare now in Canada.
You know, Stephen Harper is securely retired, and I don't see him coming out of it. Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader who for 2 years was on track to win a large majority, I think what happened is, and you know me, I'm a big Donald Trump supporter. Even though I'm Canadian, we were big supporters of him in all 3 elections, editorially, that is. For some reason, he started spooking Canadians and saying, we're going to annex you and we're going to make you part of America. And, you know, obviously that's not going to happen. It was just a rhetorical yanking Trudeau's chain. But that spooked about 1 million voters. And you wouldn't think 1 million voters is a lot in a country of 40 million people. But that was enough for people to say, uh-oh, Pierre Poilievre is sort of a mini MAGA. He's a mini Trump. He's sort of the most like Trump of our different parties. The Liberal Mark Carney ran an extremely anti-American campaign, basically running against Trump more than he was running against Pierre Poilievre. And Poilievre was in a bit of a pickle, because is he really going to try and outdo the Liberals in anti-Americanism? It wouldn't come across as credible. And 1 million Canadians just sort of thought, duh, I have to vote for Mark Carney or our country will be swallowed up. And Trump did his best to magnify that. And I don't understand it. I don't know how it is in America's interest to have a left-wing neighbor. Like, wouldn't you want a pro-military, pro-capitalism, smaller government, anti-woke prime minister in Canada? How does it benefit America to have Mark Carney. I don't understand that, but I hate to say it, but I think Donald Trump, his interventions is why we have a liberal PM. I think that it's possible for Poilievre to win, and I think immigration is actually the key. And in recent weeks, Poilievre has come out harder and harder on immigration. He now says we have to send a lot more people out than are coming in. That's a way of saying remigration. I think that there was no way Poilievre could have won the argument if the argument was who can stand up to Trump. But if he would have chosen his own controversy and said, freeze immigration, deport the illegals, send home the temporary foreign workers and the international students, remigrate, it would have been controversial. The media would have gone nuts. It would have changed the subject from Trump annexing Canada. And you know what? I think enough of the silent majority would have said, it's such a crisis in this country. Like I know it's bad in the UK. I know it's bad in America. I know it's bad in Ireland, but I think it's actually the worst of all the countries here in Canada. And that stat I gave you about New York City versus Toronto or Brampton, like it is so bad here. And even new immigrants say that.
Tell me about the situation with Islam. I love one of your fellow Canadians, Gad Saadin, always calls it out so well. The issue of Islam and the failure to integrate in that clash. And you put up a clip, I think it was maybe 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, about some of your reporters being threatened with arrest for simply filming the call to prayer and Muslims praying. They didn't want that to happen. And then another thing you've reposted, which just happened today, was a solicitor in the UK, Michael Phillips, talking to Toby Young about Muslims in the Home Office in the UK and stopping those who are fleeing Muslim countries who are Christians, blocking them because we have a Muslim problem in our Home Office. So what is the situation in Canada? I guess you've got one side, you've got the liberal elite, that's probably the police officers, going in and thinking you can't say anything about Islam. But the other side, I guess, is possibly an Islam issue, maybe within your government, that could also pose other issues.
Well, let me give you the example of Montreal, which I think you mentioned. There is a large, beautiful, historic cathedral called the Basilica in Montreal. And by the way, in Montreal, there's also about 100 mosques. So if you're a Muslim and you want to pray, you have an enormous amount of choice. But a pro-Hamas protest almost every week is right outside the basilica for some reason. What's the Catholic Church got to do with that? And they have, as the apex of their protest, they have this mass street prayer right outside the doors of the Catholic Basilica. Why? What are you doing? That's not an act of faith. That's an act of dominance in the public square, showing who the new boss is. And why are you aggressing against Christians? I don't understand it. I think this is enormous news. So we have a reporter in Montreal who simply wanted to point a camera at it and ask people, what are you doing? And not only was she harassed, including physically, by the pro-Hamas protesters, but the police shooed her away. One cop said, do you want to get punched? I mean, just so abusive. Because what is the path of least resistance? 100 angry Hamas protesters or one petite female reporter and her cameraman? If you're a cop, which is the path of least resistance? And what's incredible is that we are the only journalists there. There's another one or two citizen journalists, but Montreal is the second largest city in Canada. There's an enormous number of reporters, both in French and English. They choose not to report on this. Let me say one more word about the police there. So the police actually were doing some law enforcement a year or so ago, and then a bunch of these Hamas activists sued the city of Montreal, and the mayor ordered the city to pay $25 million to the Hamas protesters. So number one, huge transfer of public money to the worst people in the city. Number two, you're a cop. What message does that send you? Oh, my mayor is telling me not to enforce the law against the Hamas activists. So you have the worst of all worlds. You have two-tier policing like you have in the UK. We see that in Toronto as well. I myself was arrested, if you can believe it. There was a pro-Hamas protest, and they had this recreation of a scene of the last moments of Yahya Sinwar. That was the head of Hamas. And this was in my neighborhood. I live in a fairly Jewish place. And so I just went to photograph this crazy, like, some people have Christmas decorations on their lawn. Some people have Halloween decorations on their lawn. These guys had built like a Yahya Sinwar reenactment in a Jewish neighborhood. And they were shouting on loud, and I just went to film it. And a cop said to me, and I wasn't interviewing anyone. It was on the public sidewalk. I was just taking pictures of this crazy thing. And the cop said, "If you don't leave, I'll arrest you." And I said, "Why?" And he said, and I got this all on tape, he said, "Your mere presence here could cause them to make a disturbance. Like, you being here will make them freak out. So instead of stopping them from freaking out, I'm arresting you, a local resident, because your mere presence here is upsetting them." They handcuffed me and took me to jail.
Wow.
They released me without charge. What were they going to charge me with? Standing on a sidewalk? So that's the state of policing here. And yeah, I mean, the police here, they have a Muslim podcast, an explicitly Muslim podcast in the Toronto police. And a couple of the cops were talking about how one of the upsides of October 7th was so many people now have interest in Islam, and they want to know more about Islam. So they're talking about the pros and cons of October 7th. And they also said it's Islamophobia to call people at these protests pro-Hamas. That's Islamophobia. So get ready for censorship of anyone who calls out Hamas. That's why I'm against censorship. It's very hard to be against censorship because we hear things we don't like, and the things we don't like, we want silence. But I promise you, if you set the precedent of censorship, it will absolutely be used against you. And so the answer is free speech, but that only works in a Western liberal high trust society. If you bring in millions of people to your country who have no tradition of free speech, who are brutal, who maybe use free speech temporarily to get more power when they'll then extinguish free speech for everyone, it comes back to immigration. I can't think of any secondary issue that wouldn't be ameliorated by dealing with the primary issue of mass immigration, whether it's the cost of housing or wages or lineups for the NHS or crime, especially crimes against women, discord in the streets. I cannot think of a single secondary political issue, traffic even. I don't know if you see images, but Los Angeles has about 800,000 illegals, and many of them have self-deported. I know that sounds like a laugh, but they're leaving. Many of them coming to Canada. The traffic in LA, worst traffic in America, the traffic apps show that the traffic is lighter. I mean, it's shocking if you were to say goodbye to every illegal in Canada or in the UK or America, tell me one thing that wouldn't be a higher quality of life.
The way to fix quality of life in LA would be to put a train to LAX, and then you wouldn't have to sit in that traffic, which I've experienced. Ezra, I need to finish on a really important rally that's happening in September. So I need to, and usually fly in the UK. Sometimes you fly, you land the morning and you leave the evening. And that shows your absolute commitment to reporting on issues that others will not report on. And often you're in the UK to report on Tommy Robinson and his trials, which are many. But he is holding a huge free speech rally after serving, I can't remember, it was 6-7 months in solitary confinement. I went to visit him at the beginning of the year. you're going to be there with so many other people. It's looking like a really exciting, well, it'll be an exciting day on the 13th, but you're going to come a little bit longer. Do you want to fill us in on you? You'll be obviously one of the keynote speakers there, but you're bringing a team. Fill us in and maybe how people can actually get involved in that and follow what you're up to there.
Sure. And you're right. Tommy Robinson, I've known him for about a decade. He worked for Rebel News for about a year or so, and then he went independent. And sometimes
I was going to say he went rogue.
yeah, well, he is, let me just say this. He's not meant to have a boss. Being Tommy Robinson's boss is not an easy job. But he gets arrested sometimes. He really is being treated as an enemy of the state. And I don't think that the justice system treats him equally to others. It's sort of like Lucy Connolly getting 31 months for a tweet and actual rapists getting a lower sentence. It's based on race and culture and politics. I just simply don't think the UK judiciary is blind anymore. You know, that statue of Lady Justice with the scales and the blindfold. The blindfold is important. It means I'm not going to take into account irrelevant characteristics like who you are. I'm just going to measure the law. The UK has lost that. So when Tommy is imprisoned, I sometimes try and help because he is sort of incapacitated. There are limits on his communication. I try and help Tommy from time to time. And so that's the nature of my relationship with him now. He's asked me to speak on the 13th. I'd be delighted to do so. And I thought, well, why don't I come in a couple days early because and then I thought, well, why don't I bring some friends? Because this is going to be such a huge free speech rally. And for people who've been following Rebel News and our coverage of Tommy over the last decade, maybe they want to meet him. So I'm putting together something I'm calling the Free Speech Mission. And we have a website for it, freespeechmission.com. And it's for people overseas who want to fly into the UK. We'll get there Wednesday night. On Thursday and Friday, we'll have sort of a conference where we'll meet with different political and journalists and activists to learn a little bit more about the state of things in the UK. I don't want to give away the names yet because there'll be pressure on them. Like I have to be careful because there'll be a lot of cancel culture deployed against our little mission. But we're going to have a free speech mission. We're going to be in the UK Thursday and Friday, meeting with opinion leaders and other community leaders. On Saturday, we're going to go to the big rally. I'll be speaking. Sunday, we've got a day outside of London. We're going to take everybody in a bus on sort of a tourist mission, and then we finish that night and people check out on Monday. So it's actually, we're turning it into a 5-day trip. So it's obviously a big commitment, and it's not for everybody, but we've got 50 spaces, and this is for Canadians or Americans who want to get to know the UK a little bit. We will be having dinner with Tommy privately, which will, I think, be the highlight of the trip. But we have confirmed some amazing other speakers. Again, I'm not saying their names, and I know that sounds curious, but it's because I don't want pressure to be put on them to cancel. So it's not cheap because you got to fly to London, and then we're staying in a nice hotel, and we're going to have some conference speakers there. But if you are someone who has some means and would like a meaningful trip, like if you want to go on a great vacation, go to a beach, or go to Florence, Italy or something. But if you want a meaningful seminar, educational trip to meet some of the best people in the UK, the highlight of which will be the rally on the 13th, then consider coming with us. Obviously, if you're a Brit, the math is a bit different because you don't have to stay in a hotel or the airfare. But this is really targeted at worldwide supporters of Tommy who want to get to know the man personally, who want to be there on the 13th. freespeechmission.com. It's not for everybody, and it's not cheap because it involves hotels and flights. But I'm excited about it, and I love coming over there to see the fight for freedom.
Well, it's going to be an exciting event. All the Tommy rallies have been amazing, including the ones that have been held on his behalf when he's been in prison. I remember, I think 2018, I think it was Raheem kind of headed up that rally in Westminster, so it'll be huge. So yeah, freespeechmission.com. I'd encourage anyone who wants to, and it's a great opportunity to go and be part of a great event, but also, Ezra, to be with you and to shadow you and learn a little bit of all the huge contacts you have. So I know many people want to go. The links are in the description, but freespeechmission.com. Ezra, always appreciate you coming on. I know Rebel never stop and Ezra never stops. So I know you've got demands. So thank you for giving us a little bit of an overview of what Rebel are doing, a little bit of the situation in Canada, and obviously that event on the 13th September. It'll be wonderful to see you in London for that. So thank you.
We'll see you then, Peter. Thanks for having me on the show again.